afternoon, Jocelyn.
Good afternoon, Anna.
It is indeed a great pleasure and a great special event to be this afternoon with you. And we hope that the outcome of this conversation will be of great help for many girls and boys at schools in Galicia. So, well, let's start asking about your childhood, in a sense that you were born in Northern Ireland, from Belfast, and perhaps it was not an usual decision for a girl at your time, at your age, to become a scientist. When was it clear to you or mind that you wanted to become a scientist, physicist? And if you could give some advices to girls nowadays and to young students, if they decide at school ages to become scientists.
I nearly did not get to be a scientist. In the British school system, you start doing many new subjects like learning languages, starting science, when you are about age 12. And when I was age 12, I remember the girls got sent to the cookery room, boys to the science lab. And I was upset because I had been told by my parents that I would get to do science when I got to this stage.
I see.
My parents phoned the head of the school that evening, as did a local doctor who also had a girl in my class, as did one other set of parents. And when the science class met for the second time, there were 3 girls.
I see.
3 girls and all the boys.
Mm-hmm.
The teacher had never taught girls before. He made us sit right at the front, up against his desk, because really we were dynamite. We did physics that first term. And loved it, and I found it very easy. In the exam, I got 97%.
Oh, congratulations.
Top of the class. The one thing I got wrong was the speed of light, which for an astronomer is interesting. I worked in the old British units, and the question was, what is the speed of light? And I wrote down right 186,000 miles per second. And for the first time in my life, I looked at that number and said, that's very big, and changed it to miles per hour.
I see. How interesting.
I lost some marks. The science teacher, I do not remember congratulating me. I remember him telling the boys off for not working hard enough and allowing themselves to be beaten by a girl. I did my bachelor's degree, my first degree in Glasgow in Scotland, and I ended up in a class of 50 people, 49 men and me.
I see.
And I was a bit lonely, a bit isolated there. I often had to work things out on my own. It would have been good if there had been some other women to work with, but there weren't. Then I went to the south, to Cambridge, to do a PhD. I guess the Spanish equivalent might be going from Galicia to Madrid.
Probably, yes.
And everybody in Cambridge seemed very, very clever, and they felt they had a right to be there. And I was an outsider, an intruder, and I found that a bit scaring, a bit daunting. but I knew it was a great opportunity.
Mhm.
And although I thought they had made a mistake admitting me that I was not clever enough,
Oh.
I decided I would work my hardest. And if they threw me out, they threw me out. I'd done my best.
I have a question from a 12-year-old girl in Rafael Dieste High School in Galicia, in La Coruña, and she wrote a question to you, if we may.
Yes.
And Johanna Osayande is her name. And she says, "Hello, I am Johanna. Nice to meet you, Jocelyn. My question is, why did you choose to work in this hard job? And if you were not doing this job, what would you be doing today?"
Ah, hello, Johanna. Thank you for the question. I liked physics, and I decided before I left school that I would do a physics degree at university, and then I would become an astronomer, a radio astronomer, studying stars and galaxies through the radio signals that they send out, the radio emissions. It was a very new branch of astronomy, just developed since the 1940s, and still very young, exciting, developing fast. If I'd not done that, at university, I had to do a variety of subjects, and I did some geology, studying earth and rocks, and I loved it and found it very easy, and wondered about changing to being a geologist. But in the end, I didn't. But maybe if the physics had been too hard, I might have done geology, perhaps.
Geology is also very interesting, but to tell you the truth, we are all very happy that you stayed in astronomy.
It was radio astronomy at that time was exciting because it was very new. The equipment that we had was still very primitive. The University of Cambridge, one of the biggest, most successful universities in the country, had one computer at that time, and it had very small memory, less than your laptop.
Yeah.
The whole university. So computers had not yet really arrived. They were just coming. And it meant that my data analysis was old-fashioned methods, charts and graphs and paper. But it was an exciting time because radio astronomy was still very new, and there were things to find that nobody else had seen. So it was a good place to be at that time. It's quite a long process. Discoveries rarely happen just like that.
Sure.
It's a long, long piece of work. And I was, yes, working on quasars, discovering more quasars. But in amongst that, because of the equipment I was using, I picked up another kind of object, which we now call a pulsar, a pulsating radio source. And again, that discovery was a long process. First of all, several months, occasionally noticing something I did not understand properly in coming in on my telescope, and then realizing that this thing I did not understand was always coming from the same part of the, from what I'm trying to say is from the same right ascension, from the same place amongst the constellations. And discuss this with my thesis advisor, decide I need to make some expanded observations. For a month, I go to the observatory at the right time to make the expanded observations. It's gone. Not there. My advisor is cross. It's the graduate student's fault. It's always the graduate student's fault.
Always.
And then one day I catch it, and it's a string of pulses. Blip, 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 blip. And my thesis advisor thinks I have got some wires crossed or something stupid like that. But he comes the next day and he sees it for himself.
Mm-hmm.
And we realize we have an object that pulses with a very well defined rate, and that it keeps its place amongst the stars. And we are doing various tests on this, and we are wondering how we announce this discovery, because when we have only one, that's difficult. And just then I find a second one, and a third, and a fourth. So we can now announce these. It's not just one. It's not the graduate student being crazy. It's real.
It's real.
Radio telescopes can pick up interference very easily.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that this is regular pulses suggests it might have human origin, but it keeps its place amongst the constellations. So it comes around every 23 hours, 56 minutes, not every 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So if it is Jose driving home from work in a car that causes interference, Jose is getting off work 4 minutes earlier every day, 28 minutes a week, and this has been going on for several months.
No. No.
That doesn't make sense. And then we asked colleagues who had a separate radio telescope and receiver if they could see it.
Mm-hmm.
They could. So it's not something within my telescope.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
It's out there. So you do tests like this to try and work out as much as you can about the object. And now we know of probably 3,000, 4,000 pulsars in our galaxy. And we know they're very small and very heavy. If you took a little, maybe like a thimble, fill it with material from one of these stars, it weighs more than the whole population of the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very compact, extreme physics.
Mm-hmm.
We can use them also to check Einstein's theories. And Einstein's theories look pretty good.
This answers a question of one of our colleagues, these people outside that, as I told you, set some questions. In this case, it was Pedro Bell from Coruña, I imagine as well, that he was asking about the various hypotheses and the various outcomes of the study of stars. I think this question has been well answered, or sufficiently answered. But we have a question from another high school student from the same center, the Rafael Dieste Institute in A Coruña. His name is Alex Pita, and he also has another question, if we may. He says, "Hello, my name is Alex. I am from Rafael Dieste Secondary School. My question is, if pulsars die like common stars or live forever?" That's the question.
Right. Thank you, Alex. That's a good question. We do believe they die. We now know they are spinning stars, and as they die, they gradually slow and stop sending out radio waves. So we can't see them anymore. So yes, we think there are dead pulsars as well as the pulsars we see. I have discovered that you do very well if you do not get a Nobel Prize.
Good.
You get many, many, many other prizes.
No, sure, we know. Thank you. Yes.
If you get a Nobel Prize, nobody gives you anything after that.
I see.
They feel they cannot match the Nobel Prize.
Good point. Good point.
So you have this wonderful week in Stockholm, you get a Nobel Prize, and that's the end of it. Whereas if you do not get a Nobel Prize, you get many, many things. So there's a party this year, and maybe the year after next, there's another party for another prize. And then a few years later, another prize and another party, because you did not get the Nobel Prize.
Wonderful. It's a wonderful point of view. Wonderful.
If we go back to when I was a student in Cambridge, I was feeling an outsider. I was not a male. I was not from a expensive English school. And because I was an outsider, I was working hard and discovered pulsars. Now, my thinking was, if we could get more people who were outsiders to do research, to add to the diversity in physics departments, maybe there would be more discoveries.
Sure.
So the funding is for people from minorities, underrepresented groups who want to do research in physics. And the first 4 awards have been made. The first 4 students will have started this October.
Oh, great. We have a colleague. She's an amateur astronomer from Sabadell in Catalonia. Her name is Merce Correa, and she asked, which ones are the main subjects in physics or astrophysics today that interest you? And if you continue going observing, would you still go to the telescope or to the radio telescope? And if you do, which objects are you following?
Lovely question. Thank you. I no longer go observing myself. I'm supposed to be retired. Supposed to be, I'm not, but I no longer go observing. The subject that is interesting me at the moment is called time domain astronomy.
Mm-hmm.
We can now make short exposures, rapid observations. And if we make many short exposures, many rapid observations, particularly in the radio, well, no, that's not just true in many branches of astronomy, we are finding that many things up in the sky are variable. They change their brightness, or they flash and die away, and maybe flash again. And this is a subject area that's now beginning to grow very fast and is discovering all sorts of surprising things. The one that I find most interesting are called fast radio bursts,
Mm-hmm.
which were first discovered by people studying pulsars. They found a short burst that looks like a pulse from a pulsar, only it was from much, much further away beyond our galaxy, where pulsars are too faint for us to see.
Mm-hmm.
And they thought, curious. And then several years went by, and then we started finding more. And we get better and better equipment for finding these, and we're finding more and more and more. And now we have about 3,000, and they are all from away beyond our galaxy, in other galaxies. Most of them, we have only seen the one burst.
Mm-hmm.
From some, we see other bursts, repeaters.
Mm-hmm.
And they are, don't know.
We still don't know. Mm-hmm.
It's fun. It's weird. It's bizarre.
And another question from Jose Luis Salto. It's another amateur astronomer from Malaga. And he asks the following question. If you could have chosen at what time to live in and to develop your scientific career, do you like the time you had, so to speak, the technological development you had and the way in which you follow the improvements, or would you have chosen a future situation, a future time, to be able to see further revolutionary astrophysical achievements or better computational capacities or whatever may come in the future?
I think I would like for there to have been more women around.
Good answer.
There were very, very few women when I was young. There are more now. We could do with more still, but now there are more, and I think it might be slightly easier if there were other women around. So maybe I would be 10 or 20 years younger.
Then we have another question from Mario Garcia from IO. He's also an amateur astronomer from IO group. And he asks, if you were young now and you were finishing astronomy or physics studies now, today, what would you like to enter a PhD for? Which line of research would you follow? What would you like to research in?
I think I would try and get a job at the Rubin telescope in Chile. This is a telescope that is building at the moment and is not yet finished. It's big. It's an optical telescope with a mirror of 8.3 meters, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be looking for things that vary in brightness. So it's time domain. It reckons it's going to see between 1 million and 10 million of those events every night.
I see.
Huge data flow.
Yes.
The data will have to be checked with a computer, and where things are found to have changed their brightness or moved, a message will then go out to all astronomers saying, at this position, we see the following object that's changing or moving, so that other people can follow it up. It's going to find somewhere between 1 million and 10 million alerts like that per night.
Yeah, wow.
It's a huge number.
Huge number.
People can't do it. Computers will have to do it, but somebody will have to watch that the computers are doing it properly.
We have the Nebula Segane, also an amateur astronomer. She asks, what if there is anything that amateur astronomers, and in particular female amateur astronomers, school teachers, and alike, which kind of things we could contribute with to help improving the situation, convincing young girls to pursue a scientific career if they wish?
I think it helps if people at senior school, before they go to university, if they can see that there are women doing astronomy, women doing physics. So that's one thing. Maybe making posters of Spanish women who have done physics, done astronomy, and giving the posters to schools, high schools. That's one thing. It's also becoming clear that, I'm not quite sure how to express this. High school girls and high school boys maybe need teaching in different ways. Some places in England have experimented with having the boys' science class and the girls' science class. I think that's got some evidence that it works to a degree. Because often if you have boys and girls together doing something experimental, the young man will be twisting all the knobs and doing all the jobs, and the woman will be sitting down taking the notes. And you've got to break that gender pattern. I think also it matters what kind of toys girl children and boy children are given. We're getting better now, but in Britain, girls used to be given toys that said to them they had to take care, they had to look pretty, they needed good social skills. Whereas boys were given toys which enabled them or helped them learn to solve problems, to make things, to build things.
Yes, you are right.
So yes. I think I don't know how it is in Spain, but in Britain.
Very similar, yes.
And are the girls' toys pink and the boys' toys blue?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We have a campaign in Britain called Let Toys Be Toys. So, yes, I belong to a church. I think it's a church that's probably not in Spain, maybe a little bit in Madrid, but otherwise not. It's called Quakers. Mm-hmm. And in Quakers, you are not told what you must believe. They actually say, work it out for yourself. And that's very good for a scientist.
Yes.
For a scientist. I think if I belong to a church where I was told I have to believe that and that and that and that, I would say, I can't. So a church that is more open about what you believe, what you understand, suits me as a scientist. And given that, I am very comfortable in the Quakers. It suits me well. Yeah, I do quite a lot of what we call outreach. People pay for telescopes and people to do research through their taxes. And I think they should be able to have some understanding of what has resulted from the taxes and the money they have contributed to scientific research. So I do quite a lot of talking to amateur astronomers and amateur astronomical societies and things like that. Apropos our earlier conversation, I have to say that often these audiences are mostly men, with not many women. But I have an interest in poetry about stars, galaxies, poetry with an astronomical theme. I kept very quiet about this for a long, long time, because a scientist interested in poetry, cannot be a good scientist. But gradually I started referring to it. And I discovered that the women in my audiences particularly liked the poetry. And now I even do talks about astronomy and poetry. I have come out.
We are going to finish with a question from Martin Pauli. This is a classical for us. We cannot avoid it because we are together in working groups to try to fight light pollution. What do you think about it? Please tell us, give us a hand, give us advice, give us whatever you think that we could do more to try to fight this problem.
One of the things we've done in Britain is we have some areas, some parks that have very, very little light pollution, dark sky areas. Mm-hmm. And we have maybe 10, maybe more than that, I'm not sure, around the country. So there are some places where you can go and see the stars. But we have also been working with the people who design lights for the streets, people who design lights for sports fields, trying to get ways that they can put the light where they need the light,
Exactly.
and put it where it's not needed. So it's properly focused and with good shades. And this will help. But the very worrying thing at the moment are the constellation satellites.
That's also a problem, yes.
You know, there will be, I don't know how many thousand of them. Could be very serious, that. So we have to get cleverer about this somehow.
Well, thank you so much for this time. It has been a pleasure. I have no words to tell you how it has been to share this conversation this afternoon with you. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. Please go on and keep on helping girls, helping population in general, and doing so wonderful things for astronomy and for us. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Anna, and thank you for all the preparation and care you have taken. It's been very good talking with you. Maybe one day we can meet properly.
Please, yes. As soon as we can.
Yes.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.